The trail of the occult begins in Egypt 5,000 years ago. Just before the rise of Egypt's great pharaohs, hieroglyphics or pictographs were invented. Egyptians used them to document their history and religion and to practice complex systems of astronomy, astrology, and geometry. They believed their powerful knowledge came from the god Thoth.
Thoth, or Tahuti, was the Egyptian god of magic. And more than just the god of magic, he was the god of writing, of astronomy, of mathematics and science. He invented language, invented writing.
Only priests with special training were allowed access to Thoth's sacred knowledge. Imhotep, builder of the first pyramid, was one of the chosen.
Thoth was considered to be the one who gave us writing and numbers and the arts of self-cultivation through works of consciousness. Some people thought he was a person who was then deified through his accomplishments. Other people feel that this has been a mythical entity from the beginning.
Legends held that a book of magic written by Thoth contained the secrets of the gods.
The Book of Thoth was actually considered to be in the astral plane. Not a physical thing, but something that you had to actually travel in consciousness to arrive at. And so this is probably one of those very old incidences of channeling where an individual would get into a special state of mind, contact the thoth energy wherever it was to be found, and then be tutored by this multilingual, multi-code kind of consciousness.
If you were to describe the Book of Thoth, you could also, look at a building like the pyramid or the Sphinx and say that the teachings contained therein are pages within the Book of Thoth. So all measurement, all words, all concepts are part of the Book of Thoth.
But no Book of Thoth has ever been found. The god is said to have buried it beneath the Nile and protected its secrets with a deadly curse. Modern archaeologists eventually discovered that the Babylonians had created much of the knowledge Egyptians credited to Thoth. As early as 4000 BC, they were the first to measure planetary movements. They invented the abacus, the first sequential numeric system, and some of the earliest forms of astrology and astronomy. This information spread to Egypt and helped launch one of history's greatest cultures. And like the Egyptians, the Babylonians regarded their knowledge as divine.
Every temple was an observatory. It was actually an astronomical site for watching the planets. The whole concept of divining means trying to understand the will of the gods. And in order to understand the will of the gods, you have to have something to read about them, something that you see they're doing.
The Babylonians used one of the occult's oldest arts to understand their world, divination, or accessing the supernatural. The occult means secret or hidden, and its early masters were regarded as true magicians, but they were also the first scientists. Their discoveries in the occult arts of astrology and alchemy gave birth to modern scientific disciplines.
You go back to ancient times, there was no science. So the magicians and the alchemists and the proto-mathematicians, they were doing science, but they were also doing literature and philosophy and cosmology and religion, and there was no sorting out of those things. Since the birth of what we would call modern science, science and the occult have sort of separated the paths.
Many still view the occult with suspicion, but modern science is often working on the edge of the supernatural, trying to solve mysteries that confronted the first magicians.
Serious physicists are contemplating time travel. Serious physicists are contemplating parallel universes. Serious physicists are trying to understand the 11 dimensions of string theory. And when you get into those realms, you start to look to myth and sort of magical thinking and almost surreal thinking as a way to even talk about those things.
Were the early occult masters keepers of secrets that modern science is only beginning to rediscover? After the decline of Egypt's extraordinary culture, another civilization rose, Greece in the 6th century BC. It was aided by one of the most probing minds in history, Pythagoras. Our alphabet The buildings that surround us, even the music we hear, owes a debt to this brilliant philosopher. In his pursuit of wisdom, Pythagoras traveled broadly, searching for lost occult knowledge. He found it in the mystery schools scattered throughout many different cultures. Pythagoras synthesized the elements of these teachings into a new discipline, philosophy. Its foundation, numbers.
He believed that mathematics and philosophy and an understanding of the divine all went together.
We can't say he originated anything, but he condensed and boiled down the knowledge of the world and then brought it to a practical application.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation. So the idea that numbers describe the world seems to be the case.
In 518 BC, Pythagoras opened a school in the Croton region of southern Italy. His carefully selected disciples were called mathematicoi. Their initiation was rigorous. 3 introductory years, followed by 5 years of absolute silence, then 5 more of training. Only then were students ready to learn the most sacred mysteries of numbers.
He wanted to produce philosophers like himself, so you had to be very circumspect, you had to be very self-controlled to be able to even be in his school.
Pythagoras turned the numbering system of the Babylonians into a sacred science.
They believed that number was like God, and to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
Pythagoras discovered that the mystery schools shared the belief that all of creation was at one with God.
He did a huge amount of explaining sacred mathematics by showing how the 1 splits and becomes 2, the 2 finds a synthesis and becomes 3, the 3 breaks open and becomes the 10,000 things. And that same story you read in the I Ching, you read in other metaphysical ancient documents, because everybody was trying to understand, how do we get number out of all?
Many credit Pythagoras and his school with the development of numerology and the efficient Greek alphabet eventually adopted by much of Western culture. Pythagoras also applied numbers to decode music, which Greeks regarded as the language of the gods. He invented the monochord, which defined the numerical ratios of the musical scale. Pythagoras believed he had solved the mysteries of the universe.
But there was also this idea that there was a music of the spheres, that the heavens itself was playing a sort of orchestral piece.
The planets themselves stack up around the sun at harmonic intervals. White light breaks out into color at harmonic intervals. Sound is also harmonically, the harmonic sequence that comes out of any given note, those nodes of overtones are all governed by the same mathematics. So it was Pythagoras who articulated harmonic math to the West.
Ultimately, the exclusivity of Pythagoras' school caused its downfall. In 508 BC, the school was burned to the ground.
There was a point at which his schools were attacked and destroyed and some of his followers killed. Pythagoras himself left and went off into the countryside and died, and no one really knows what happened. Some people think that he committed suicide, but it's a mystery. No one's really sure.
The society was hounded into extinction. Generations of later Greeks built upon Pythagoras' philosophy, and Aristotle turned it into science. This rediscovery fueled an extraordinary rebirth of culture.
Well, this was the point people began to realize, oh, there was wisdom amongst the ancients.
You have a new reverence for Egyptian and Greek and Roman and Hebraic tradition, because people are looking for really empowering knowledge and looking to understand the secrets of the ancients.
Art and science swept through Western Europe in the 1400s as it ushered in the Renaissance. Leading the movement into new ways of looking at old knowledge was the German physician Paracelsus. Born in Germany in 1493, Paracelsus trained in traditional medicine but also studied alchemy. Ultimately, forced out of school for challenging the status quo, he embarked on a nomadic life supporting himself with astrology readings. In his far-flung travels, he sought knowledge from any source he could find.
Paracelsus went around Europe and talked to barbers, talked to witches, talked to midwives, talked to, the village healer, and gathered together from everywhere what worked. And this was his huge final stance, is I use what works.
He rejected outworn theories, ventured beyond accepted boundaries. His pioneering experiments with minerals and chemicals laid the foundation for modern medicine. It was just the beginning of a scientific revolution. The next century would herald the discovery of an occult text that went against more than tradition. It was a threat to the power of the church. The Renaissance brought about a new spirit of learning, and academies sprung up throughout Europe. In the 15th century, Marsilio Ficino founded one of Italy's most progressive. With the support of his patron, Cosimo Medici, Ficino acquired and translated a collection of documents reputedly authored by a mysterious Egyptian magician named Hermes Trismegistus.
An emissary from the Orthodox Church brought a cache of documents, and Ficino found, I think it was 12 books supposedly written by Hermes. They weren't necessarily all written as one book, but they were gathered together once these translations were made.
The documents, which became known as the Hermeticum, contained teachings from the early Christian era that had been lost for centuries. Their pedigree appeared to be impeccable. The name of their supposed author, the mysterious Hermes Trismegistus, was a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, the two greatest gods of Greek and Egyptian magic.
There was occultism in there. There were esoteric doctrines. There was alchemy. There was magic. There was astrology. And Ficino and his school considered these documents to be extremely old, predating Plato, in fact, and having come from Egypt.
The discovery of the Hermeticum during the Renaissance created a new generation of occultists. They sought to combine religion with science and magic, a dangerous undertaking in a society ruled by Christianity. John Dee would risk his life to study its teachings.
John Dee was a giant. John Dee was the embodiment of the ideal of an enlightened being who had the spiritual understanding of his role and mission in life, and who was gifted with, superior intelligence.
But like Pythagoras, he would pay a heavy price for daring to seek out the wisdom of the gods. The ultimate Renaissance man, Dee followed in the footsteps of Paracelsus, using experimentation to become a gifted scientist, an inventor, a mathematician, a brilliant cryptographer, and a pioneer in the field of navigation.
But he was also an occultist, he was a sorcerer, he was an astrologer. He was, in fact, Queen Elizabeth's personal court astrologer. And in that sense, his interests were all very much in keeping with the thinking of the time. There wasn't a distinction made between magic and science, and he was pursuing an understanding of the world around him.
When Queen Elizabeth rose to the throne of England in 1558, she installed Dee as court astrologer, but his influence reached far beyond his position. England's famous magician was also a spy for the Queen.
He was involved with political intrigue. He was a trusted ally of the Queen, but he was also working behind the scenes throughout Europe to help to lower the power of the church and to substitute Protestant power in its stead.
With Dee's guidance, Queen Elizabeth officially legitimized the most significant occult science of the Renaissance, alchemy. Alchemists had two goals: to heal illness and to turn base metal into gold. They believed success could be achieved by finding the Philosopher's Stone, a mystical agent that would also produce a higher level of consciousness in the alchemist.
That was really an approach to trying to understand the way the physical world works, and alchemy as a practice was the forefather of modern chemistry.
Alchemy had existed since the early Egyptians, but in the hands of the Renaissance scientists, it reached new heights.
Everything that we know and do today in our modern science was developed by the alchemists. Laboratory techniques were part of the alchemical tradition. The observation of results, the scientific method is a child of alchemy.
Alchemists were on the leading edge of science. They discovered phosphorus, zinc, the distillation of alcohol, the germ nature of diseases. They were the first to understand how blood circulates in the body. The church viewed their unorthodox experiments and scientific breakthroughs with growing suspicion.
We are speeding up what nature does. We're speeding up the rate at which the metals evolve. We're speeding up the rate at which medicines are combined and raise consciousness. And the church felt that you can't be speeding up God's creation without recourse to demons.
Despite his work in alchemy, Dee's true occult passion lay in divination. He believed that he could apply scientific methods to communicate with supernatural beings. Dee's obsession with contacting the angels would have disastrous consequences. But Dee used a divination method known as scrying. Dee relied on looking into a crystal ball that would reflect back supernatural information.
Scrying is a long-time-old technique, scrying into glasses, mirrors, bodies of water, anything that would have a reflective surface, and see if you could see not just the material things, but the spiritual things standing behind.
These efforts were unsuccessful until one day a young man named Edward Kelly appeared at his door. Kelly seemed to have the talent to see into the shadow world.
Their system involved Edward Kelly looking into a amethyst crystal and describing what he saw, and John Dee would then record these communications.
Kelly began receiving messages from the angels. They spoke in a language he called Enochian, from the lost biblical book of Enoch. These transmissions are early examples of what New Age followers now call channeling.
What Dee and Kelly brought forth was completely new. It was not based on tradition.
He appeared to be speaking a new language.
The Enochian language does appear to have a coherent vocabulary and syntax, and this doesn't seem like the sort of thing that Kelly, who was not a particularly educated or schooled person, could have just invented. He couldn't have faked something like that.
John Dee and Kelly embarked on a tour of Europe to share their discoveries, just as the Inquisition launched another crackdown against heretics.
All you needed was a slight change in political or religious circumstance, and something that was considered exceptionally wonderful would then be considered demonic and scary.
Dee returned home to England to find that a mob had destroyed his irreplaceable library and scientific and occult instruments. Dee had fallen out of favor with the court. The man who began as a leading scientist of the Renaissance ended his life penniless, branded as a sorcerer.
Dee's main legacy was not to science, it is to magic. And it's because of those who have come after, who have seized upon what he created and made it into a new worldview, whether it's consciousness arts or ceremonial magic or divination, could take place inside these new parameters that they set up.
John Dee's fall was the beginning of the occult's end. The practices were reviled by the church as the work of demonic possession.
One thing you gotta understand about white supremacy, because it's covert, it puts all of its true messages in its symbols. Its symbols. What is the symbol for Nabisco products? What is the symbol for Chevrolet cars? What is the symbols for the Catholic Church? If you investigate the symbol, you'll really see what they really stand for. Symbols are your key to really knowing what you're getting into. The problem is we are symbol, as Professor Griffith would say, who does the whole thing on symbolism and hip-hop, we are symbolically illiterate. Black people cannot read the symbols. Next slide. Everything in your mind is stored as a what? Image. You do not store words. Everything in the brain is codified in a symbol. That's why in ancient Kemet, the entire language was based on pictures. You know why? Because the mind would be able to readily learn it and readily do what? Store and memorize it. Everything is turned into an image for the mind. Nothing is stored as letters. Remember, your mind is like fertile soil. You plant a seed in it, sooner or later it's gonna grow. That's why it's so dangerous to let our babies watch and listen to anything they hear, because you don't know how the seed is gonna sprout. I'm getting sick and tired of black parents telling me, I didn't raise him like that. I didn't raise him like that. I know, but you let the TV raise him like that.
We speak of being with it, meaning we've understood completely. We've got the message, as it were, in every way possible. But in the older book or print culture, people were not with it. They were away from it by themselves with their own private point of view. Now, you have no point of view when you're with it because you accept the thing totally. And we're with it because these new media of ours, the one you talked about in the appliance store, have made our world into a single unit. The world is now like a continually sounding tribal drum, where everybody gets the message all the time. A princess gets married in England, and boom, boom, boom go the drums. We all hear about it. An earthquake in North Africa, a Hollywood star gets drunk, away go the drums again. I think you'll find everything we observed tonight about the media points in the direction of tribal man and away from individual man. Involuntarily, we're getting rid of individualism. We're in a process of making a tribe. For just as books and their private point of view are being replaced by the new media, so the concepts which underlie our actions, our social life, are changing. We are no longer so concerned with self-definition, with finding our own individual way. We're more concerned with what the group knows, of feeling as it does, of acting with it, not apart from it.
Picture. This is a giant geo-psychopolitical picture, and things are happening with the use of subliminal, indirect, and reverse psychological propaganda. It's made to be confusing by the evilarchy that controls not only the United States but Britain.
The power of suggestion, we are told, is the greatest force on earth known to man. Alexander the Great, that conquered the world, have speakers that would go and speak every morning and evening to the people that were in the city, telling them to give up. You're not going to come out of this alive. And by tearing down the mind to the fact, to the possibility that they will survive, then negative thoughts come in, and the people said, let's give in. He's going to have us anyway. And history tells us that he won the world not by the sword, but by the words that he spake, or that his people speak for him. So the power of suggestion is the greatest force on earth known to man. That's been established by knowledgeable people.
You will obey me while I lead you, and eat the garbage that I feed you, until the day that we don't need you. Don't go for help, no one will heed you. Your mind is totally controlled. It has been stuffed into my mold, and you will do as you are told, until the rights to you are sold. Take it away, Frank!
That's right, folks. Don't take that down.
Now, the next thing, the three-parts policy that they had adopted there, the second one was to find a way of being able to get total control of people's minds. And that would be done by taking hypnotism out of the realm of the occult and introduce it as a new science for the benefit of mankind. Now, the time came when Lucifer decided that he had to choose a person to initiate this thing. And Franz Mesmer, which was an Austrian physician, was chosen. Mesmer originated a theory called animal magnetism, later on named mesmerism. Mesmer was led by the spirits to believe, and this is what the priest said, was led by the Spirit to believe that certain persons have a magnetic influence within themselves, so to speak, that would cause them to have great power over other persons, even to the point of placing them into a trance. And at that time, that was readily accepted by people in general.
Oh, it was just thin claps. It's thinning out. See, we got weak jelly-back pastors now. They ain't gonna stand up and say, boy, you don't get in the club and then come up in here with no stamp on your hand playing my organ. All them spirits you harboring and bringing up in here. Well, we can go to the club and be saved. I can take Christ to the club. People don't even know what the club was created for. The club was created by a man last name Mesmer. That's where we get the word mesmerize, who endorsed hypnosis. And he wanted to find a way to actually hypnotize somebody without actually putting a spell on them. So what they did was they created what they called a sanctuary, which we call the club now. It's a sanctuary. What they would do is they would flash the lights at a certain rhythmic pattern. They would have the low bass booming beat at a certain pattern to throw your biorhythms off and throw your heart off sync. Because once your heart beats at a certain rate. Once your heartbeat is thrown off, then you're not oxygenated properly. Once you're not oxygenated properly, you begin to lose your ability to reason. So these guys figured if we get them in the club and play the music loud enough, we won't even need drugs in there. We'll just have musical drugs. We'll make them lose temporary consciousness. We'll make them lose time. See, they go in the club and be partying and breaking it down for 4 or 5 hours and look at the watch. It was been 4 hours? Man. And they lose time because they've lost, because the music has captivated them. The lights flashing has captivated them. It was all a part of a plan to manipulate you. The Bible calls that witchcraft. Yeah, and then once you're in there and you open yourself up subliminally or subconsciously to these beats and these lights and different things, you've opened yourself up for demonic infestation. Because it's still spiritual. Everything you do in the natural has a spiritual consequence. Don't be no fool. See, I'm not the type of person just tell you don't do nothing. Don't go to the club. Christian ain't supposed to be at a club. No, I go stand before God and say, tell me, God, now what's wrong with the club so I can go tell you people? And I tell you what's wrong with the club. The club was created to steal your consciousness, to steal your ability to reason, to steal your ability to think like a regular person.
If you put someone in a position of being disabled by not feeding them or not allowing them to sleep or overwhelming them with sound, if you use massive shock treatment and you give people massive doses of drugs and put them in periods of darkness where they can't predict from one minute to another what is going to happen next, there's no consistency to sort of what's going to happen, anybody can be put in a position of being open to brainwashing. Ewan Cameron was probably the foremost psychiatrist of his time. He was using high-tech sound techniques. He was using multiple kinds of loop recorders to force people to listen to recorded messages 24 hours a day for weeks on end to basically destroy people's thinking patterns.
Oh, there it is. Lotus Casino.
I've been looking forward to this. Look, guys, remember, always put the 8s, never the 10s, okay?
We're not here to gamble, remember?
We got poker. We got blackjack.
Grover, we're not here to have fun. We just need to grab the pearl and go, okay?
This is nice. This place is officially dope.
Here's your complimentary Lotus Fun Book.
Oh, thanks, but we're not staying.
Please, yeah, I insist. It's good for everything in the hotel and casino.
Don't comp us. We're not checking in. Okay, that guy was persistent. Yeah. Now we're here for one thing and one thing only.
Wow.
That is really awesome. Where would we find a green pearl in this place?
Can I get you something? Try a lotus flower. They're so good. It's our signature dish.
Oh, really signature. Is it good?
Thank you.
Yo, do we have to pay for this?
I guess we don't.
It's free. Wow, this is the most delicious thing I've ever consumed.
Aren't we? I can't remember. I totally forgot what I was gonna say.
I think I figured it out. I think I know why we're here.
Why are we here?
To have fun.
Okay. Let's never leave.
Yeah.
Let's stay here. Hey, I think I'm gonna go get some air. I'll be right back.
Another lotus flower?
No, thank you.
Would you like another one?
I'm fine. French Connection, huh? Yeah. Seen it yet? Yeah, I think so, on DVD. What's DVD? Seriously?
Whatever, I think it's the best movie of the year.
What? Wait, this year?
Yeah, this year, 1971.
Wake up. You need to escape. Wake up.
Another lotus flower?
No.
We insist.
I really don't want another lotus flower, so please, leave me alone. Is there a problem, Mr. Jackson? No. Thank you. Percy Jackson's awake. Excuse me? Whoa, what are you doing with that? Don't eat that.
What?
We have to go now.
What are you doing? We're having so much fun.
No, we're not having fun. Grover, wake up. Grover, come on, we gotta go.
What? Look, Percy, your timing is terrible, okay? Dude, we heading to the chapel. We getting married.
Wake up!
Yo, man, you're such a buzzkill.
Percy, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this?
Both of you need to wake up now. Look at me, you're in a trance, okay? We're trapped. Listen to me, you eat the flowers. You're never gonna wanna leave, okay? We're gonna be stuck here forever. Oh, no, we gotta go.
Okay, I
gotta get behind the door.
Okay.
Now that all makes sense.
What?
That was the lair of the Lotus Eaters. They've been luring people into their traps since ancient times.
Guys, look. Tomorrow's June 21st.
No. It can't be. Today's the 15th.
No, tomorrow is the 21st. We were in there for 5 days.
Felt like hours.
Hypnosis as we know it today had its origins in the unique medical practices of Dr. Franz Anton Mesmer, a physician who lived in Vienna, Austria during the mid-18th century. Mesmer was a fervent believer in the more esoteric aspects of Western medical tradition. In the late 1770s, Mesmer moved to Paris and found more interested students there than in Vienna. The process of animal magnetism, or mesmerism, laid the foundations for the later development of hypnosis. A contemporary English doctor described Mesmer's technique in vivid detail. His patients were received with the air of mystery and studied effect. The apartment, hung with mirrors, was dimly lit. A profound silence was observed, broken only by strains of music which occasionally floated through the rooms. The patients were seated around a sort of vat which contained a heterogeneous mixture of chemical ingredients. With this and with each other, they were placed in relation by means of cords or jointed rods or by holding hands, and among them slowly and mysteriously moved Mesmer himself, affecting one by a touch, another by a look, a third by passes with his hand, a fourth by pointing with a rod. One person became hysterical, then another. One was seized with catalepsy, others with convulsions, some with palpitations of the heart, perspirations, and other bodily disturbances. The method was supposed to provoke in the sick person exactly the kind of action beneficial to his recovery. To the uninitiated, the scene was full of wonderment. The extraordinary tales of Mesmer's personal power over individuals are probably part exaggeration, part real results of his confidence and skill in the use of the means he wielded. By the mid-1780s, Mesmer's dramatic practices had drawn the amazement and scrutiny of the citizens of Paris, including the King Louis XVI himself, who commissioned a panel of renowned scientists to examine animal magnetism as fact or fiction once and for all.
I think it's true that there's the brain, there are neurons firing, and there's the mind. Okay, but regarding the mind itself, we have barely scratched the surface of how it works. What do you mean by creativity? What do you mean by consciousness? What do you mean by self-awareness?
Scientists now understand how much of the brain works inside the skull, but are still trying to discover how the mind can affect the world outside of its casing. In Paris, medical astrologer Franz Anton Mesmer stumbled almost by accident upon hypnosis. At the time, Mesmer was experimenting with magnets as a means of curing illness. Mesmer first believed that the magnets exerted the invisible force of animal magnetism. Later, he thought that the force emanated from within him, and he abandoned the magnets. In actuality, Mesmer had only rediscovered another lost occult art. The first induced hypnotic performance, recorded on papyrus in a British museum, was given at the court of Khufu in Egypt over 5,000 years ago. Later, seers at the Greek oracle of Delphi used self-hypnosis to foresee the future.
Modern hypnosis, as practiced in the United States, begins with Franz Mesmer. But if you go back even further, every culture has a way of going into a trance. It could be using music, it could be using dance, it could be sitting in meditation.
His treatment became popular in the 1770s, and Mesmer's fame quickly spread as scores of patients claimed themselves cured through mesmerism. He had laid the foundation for modern hypnosis, a practice that is now accepted as a form of treatment by the medical establishment. Hypnosis relies on suggestibility, imagination.
Our bodies can't distinguish between a real and imagined experience. For example, there was a recent study done with anger and heart disease. How researchers got people angry is they had them imagine situations that made them angry. And so just as they imagined themselves angry, their body responded as if they were actually had reason, cause to be angry, and there was a change that they were able to identify. But the real beauty of this experiment was the power of the imagination. Our imaginations can make us angry, or our imaginations can make us happy and peaceful. Whether we're angry or whether we're happy is our choice.
An entire field of alternative medicine has developed that utilizes imagining techniques to promote healing.
There are over 22 studies done on visualization and cancer healing. 18 of those studies conclusively shows visualization helps fight cancer.
Modern spiritualism began in a small town in upstate New York. Members of the local historical society often tell the tale.
Hello,
My name is Kate, and here beside me is my sister Maggie. We are the famous Fox sisters who have been credited with being the founders of the modern spiritualist movement in the United States. The spirits of this lovely local cemetery graciously invited us here to tell our story.
We moved to Hyattsville, New York with our parents, John and Margaret Fox, in December of 1847. I was 14 and Kate was 11.
These two young girls reported hearing strange raps in the house that their family had rented.
These raps seem to be utterly mysterious in nature. John and his wife Margaret have no idea where these noises are coming from. They haven't any idea what to make of them. They're terrifying, in effect. They're afraid, perhaps, that they're diabolical. They just don't know anything about them.
Spiritualism really did kind of burst in on the scene in the middle of the 19th century, in the 1840s. And it started with a pair of sisters in New York State, the Fox sisters.
Margaret and Kate Fox were two little girls when spiritualism started, and they lived in Hyattsville, New York. And in their presence, they started hearing noises, rapping sounds.
And they were just little schoolgirls. I mean, they were just naughty little girls. And it was, I think, October. And it was the winter was coming on, and evenings are very long, and it must have been very boring.
And eventually they discovered that they could make a code, as in 1 rap for yes, 2 raps for no. The classic story is that little Kate Fox was sitting in the room, and she went, and immediately, and then she went without making a sound, and then, and she said to her mother, "Mother, it can see as well as hear." Now, her mother was a nice Methodist woman, and she was freaked out.
And the word spread. And before anybody knew what was happening, here with these two naughty little girls had become a sort of cult.
Whether it was real or not, it launched a huge movement of spiritualism.
Because there was no television, one of the most popular form of entertainments was seances. Every town had 20, 30 spiritualists.
And really, within modern spiritualism, pivotal point of this was two children were able to create communication between two worlds. The story of the Fox sisters, it really is a roller coaster ride of humanity, spirituality, and tragedy.
The House of Theosophy, as it is called, was founded by a woman known as Madame H.P. Blavatsky.
Madame Blavatsky was a mystic, and she had truly supernatural powers. She had a tremendous impact on people, and was able to recruit many of the world's leading people into her organization, people like Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the great stories about Sherlock Holmes. Thomas Edison was one of her disciples, as was William Stead, who was one of the 4 original members of the secret society Cecil Rhodes created, which became the Council on Foreign Relations. Many key people, in the 19th century joined Theosophy, as in the 20th century, Margaret Sanger and Adolf Hitler were disciples of Theosophy.
In 1888, Blavatsky published her now famous work, The Secret Doctrine, a book revered by occult practitioners all over the world. Adolf Hitler reportedly slept with a copy of this book at his bedside. Blavatsky subtitled the work, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy. The Secret Doctrine is filled with ancient mystery wisdom that more than a century later continues to hold New Age readers spellbound.
There's no way that a girl with a 6th or 7th grade education could possibly have written this. These volumes were channeled to her by a demonic spirit she called Kuthumi. And she actually traveled to Tibet, to India, and she claims that she actually went to Tibet and actually met her master there.
Kuthumi is the name given to a Tibetan spirit master who was Blavatsky's teacher in her lifetime.
Blavatsky is pictured here with some of the masters or spirit beings she communed with and admired: Kuthumi, El Morya, and Saint Germain. Under the mysterious orders of such spirits, Blavatsky's mission was to bring a philosophical understanding to unexplained phenomena. Blavatsky maintained that spiritualistic phenomena without the philosophy of occultism were dangerous and misleading. For this apparent reason, the spirit beings directly commanded Blavatsky to begin the Theosophical Society. The official birthday of the society came 4 years later in 1875, with a formal declaration from Henry S. Alcott, the president and co-founder of the organization. Blavatsky's House of Theosophy would formalize what began as the New Thought movement into a religious system that would dramatically change the Western view of God and his relationship to mankind. Theosophy declares that it was formed upon the basis of a universal brotherhood of humanity. Yet Blavatsky would teach far more than a universal brotherhood. She would take the New Thought movement to the next dimension, fully exposing the source of its power in her voluminous writings.
These volumes were channeled to her, and they're very, very complex, they're very erudite, but if you read them, you will find out that she has rejected the God of the Bible and embraced Lucifer. And she's quite open about that.
She did emphasize Satan as being the true God, and Satan beckoning Adam and Eve to partake of the fruit. He was really turning them on to true godhood, and he's the one who really freed the human race in Blavatsky's teaching.
According to Blavatsky, Satan was in fact God, while Jehovah, the God of the Bible, was the real devil and enemy of mankind. Blavatsky wrote that the appellation Satan belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not to the serpent, which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. Elsewhere she writes that Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind, for it is he who opened the eyes of the automaton Adam, created by Jehovah. In the secret doctrine, she says, in antiquity and reality, Lucifer or Luciferus is the name of the angelic entity presiding over the light of truth as over the light of the day. Lucifer is divine and terrestrial light, the Holy Ghost and Satan at one and the same time. And now it stands proven, she says, that Satan, or the red fiery dragon, the lord of phosphorus, and Lucifer, or light-bearer, is in us. It is our mind, our tempter and redeemer, our intelligent liberator and savior from pure animalism.
The entire basis of the Nazi movement was founded on theosophy in her writings, and of course the symbol that she used, the swastika, is what Adolf Hitler used as the symbol of the Nazi movement. But the average individual does not understand the relationships between Madame Blavatsky's writing and her worship of Lucifer and her accessing the other dimensions and what happened in Germany under Adolf Hitler.
The Theosophical Society is Luciferianism at its core. It is openly satanic in the case of Blavatsky, certainly Luciferianism in the case of Alice Bailey. They are exalting Lucifer. He is the God of this world, the planetary logos. He is the voice of God in the Bible, according to Alice Bailey. Lucifer is God, and I think that the New World Order philosophy and how that connects is clearly tied to Luciferianism, the exaltation of Lucifer as God, even if the lower levels of globalization in the New World Order only view that in terms of a principle. For example, the ideas of Prometheus and the light bearer and the torch and all these kinds of things, that the Garden of Eden, thing was a good thing, that knowledge was given to us and by a great and awesome being. Even if they only view it as sort of allegory, that idea is Luciferianism, the exaltation of Lucifer in the Bible as a good thing, even if they don't completely view him as God. So Luciferianism is the core of Theosophical philosophy, and it's also the core of the New World Order, which again makes perfect sense to the overall thesis here that what they're doing is building up a platform to worship him.
This is Madame Helen Blavatsky. She was visited by one of those Ascension Masters. He told her, hey, got a plan. You're going to change the world. Blavatsky had been instructed by her masters, those guys, to bring the ancient wisdom from the East and the universal truth that lay behind all religions into the West via the Theosophical Society. She created the Theosophical Society where they would study the ancient wisdom of Eastern mysticism, would bring that into government and begin to influence government with this understanding: the devil always uses a woman. Helen Blavatsky would frequently dress up as a man and believe sex was a tool of the gods. She believed women could use their sexuality to rule.
Many who practiced spiritualism believed it would lead to scientific proof of the existence and immortality of the soul. And they gained an iconic champion when the Russian-born Madame Blavatsky arrived in New York at the height of spiritualism's popularity. She soon became the self-proclaimed decoder of ancient occult secrets.
She grew up in a wonderful occult library that her father had established. She could see the connections between different cultures, spiritual teachings, and she was attempting to correct the errors of Christianity by bringing in mysticism and spirituality from other cultures.
Born in the Ukraine in 1831 to a lower-ranking nobleman, Blavatsky was married early, but she abandoned her husband to spend 10 years traveling the world. She claimed to have studied with mystical adepts in India and Tibet. The exotic cigar-smoking medium became a sensation in the occult circles.
She just wouldn't accept limits. She was one of the most educated person anybody who met her had ever met. And they couldn't understand, how could this powerful intellect be in this female body, just chewing up the landscape and producing this tremendous inspiration?
Blavatsky's seances were the talk of New York. Mysterious letters would appear, written by spiritual leaders she called the Great White Brotherhood.
Blavatsky was not above taking advantage of the popularity of seances to push her own cause, and she used these seances to very spectacular effect to materialize letters written by these ascended masters as instructions being passed down to her.
The Brotherhood dictated to her the books that became the foundation of a new science of mysticism, theosophy.
Blavatsky wrote essentially two gigantic collections, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, which purported to be the teachings, the secret teachings of this kind of Eastern brotherhood, the mystery schools of initiation. And she totally altered the spiritual landscape of Western civilization by introducing those concepts.
She was very much a pioneer in bringing ideas of Eastern esotericism into the West. She focused on the similarities between Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, arguing that there is in fact a tradition that underlies all spiritual faiths in the world.
Blavatsky regarded her work as spiritual science and made connections between recent scientific advancements and occult beliefs. Blavatsky promoted the ancient Eastern mystical view that the essential nature of the world was not matter, but energy, which foreshadowed the discoveries of modern physics. Blavatsky also revived the Eastern beliefs in reincarnation and karma. Quickly acquiring a cult following, she launched the Theosophy Society.
The term theosophy, which Blavatsky coined, really comes from two words. They're of Greek origin. One is theos, which means God, and Sophia, which means wisdom. So the Theosophical Society was teaching divine or sacred wisdom.
The Theosophical Society spread internationally and still exists in many countries. Blavatsky was hailed by her followers as the mother of the New Age. But for all of Blavatsky's charisma, she soon fell victim to her own success.
And at the time that she was becoming famous, this business of spiritualism and channeling, and especially seances where you'd call up your dead ancestors. That was going all over the Western world, and she felt like that was charlatanism. And so she wanted to represent a model that stepped outside of that and spoke to the verities, the truths, the larger things. But unfortunately, in the end, she got reduced down to the very thing she was trying to fight.
She died soon afterwards. Her followers established a new headquarters in India where theosophy thrived. A young protege, Krishnamurti, was identified as a reincarnated master and groomed to lead the Theosophy Society into the 20th century. Blavatsky's synthesis of Eastern and Western spirituality broke new ground in occultism.
Aleister Crowley, the man who called himself the Beast 666, black magician, drug fiend, sex addict, and traitor to the British people.
I want none of your faint approval or faint dispraise. To hell with Christianity, rationalism, Buddhism. I want blasphemy, murder, rape, revolution, anything bad or good, but strong.
In 1920, Aleister Crowley founded a commune in Sicily to practice the beliefs that he said would one day sweep away Christianity and free men from all restriction and repression. 3 years later, Mussolini deported Crowley and his followers from Sicily after reports of human and animal sacrifice and unimaginable sexual depravity caused an international scandal. The British press called Crowley the wickedest man in the world.
I have exposed myself to every form of disease, accident, and violence. I have driven myself to delight in dirty and disgusting debauches, and to devour human excrements and human flesh. I have mastered every mode of my mind, and made myself a morality more severe than any other in the world. 1,000 years from now, the world will be sitting in the sunset of Crowleyanity.
Aleister Crowley declared the death of Christianity. He was to be the new Messiah that would replace the pallid dead Christ.
I believe he was the real thing. He had given himself under demonic control. He was evil.
Crowley saying, "My God, why are you so unhappy? You want to make love? Well, make love for Christ's sake. You want to take drugs? You want to expand your consciousness? Please do it."
Since his death in 1947, Crowley has become an icon of rebellion. The Rolling Stones, David Bowie, Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page have all been influenced by his message of freedom. He continues to be a key figure in the occult and is a focus for those engaged in the battle between good and evil. This was a battle that was to play a crucial part in Crowley's childhood. Aleister Crowley was born in 1875 into a wealthy brewing family. It was the height of the Victorian era, and his devoutly religious parents constantly warned him about the dangers of temptation and the terrible consequences of sin. Aleister was inspired by his father's evangelizing, and his earliest ambition was to follow him and become a crusader for Christ. Then something happened that completely shattered his world. Crowley's father died suddenly, leaving Aleister, who was still only a boy of 11, bereft. His sorrow turned to anger. He grew to hate his mother, the church, and the pious tutors she employed to school him.
I had arrived at the conclusion that the Plymouth Brethren were an exceptionally detestable crew. I wanted sin, a supreme spiritual sin, but hadn't the slightest idea how to go about it.
He really could not bear his mother, and the first opportunity, when he was a teenager, he had the maid on his mother's bed, and obviously felt that this was a kind of revenge. He developed a tremendous state of resentment about his family and all the family background, and so from the beginning, you see, Crowley sort of had a pretty good kind of background in revolt.
Crowley failed to distinguish himself during his school days, apart from getting expelled from Tunbridge after catching gonorrhea from a prostitute. At Cambridge, Crowley finally broke free from the shackles of his upbringing. He published his own poetry, revealing a rapidly developing obsession with sex. Crowley's poetry was so pornographic that he would have been prosecuted for obscenity had he not taken the precaution of publishing it abroad under a false name. It was at this point that Crowley met Rose Kelly, a young society lady. Courting scandal, he married her the day after they met and took her off to Egypt for their honeymoon, leaving the Abramelin ritual unfinished.
The honeymoon was a period of uninterrupted debauchery. Once in the first 3 weeks or so, Rose took some trifling liberty. I recognized the symptoms and turned her up and spanked her. She henceforth added the qualities of a perfect wife to those of a perfect mistress.
Back in Cairo, they were continuing their orgy of hedonistic excess when the black magic ritual in the Great Pyramid had an unexpected result that was to be the turning point in Crowley's life.
Rose got into a strange state of mind. I had never seen anything like it before. She kept on repeating, dreamily, yet intensely, "They are waiting for you. They are waiting for you."
When Crowley asked Rose who was waiting, she kept repeating that it was Horus, an Egyptian god. Crowley was puzzled and irritated by his wife's bizarre behavior. She knew nothing of magic and even less of Egyptology. Surely she, of all people, was not receiving a message from the gods. Crowley decided to take Rose down to the Egyptian Museum to test what she was saying. Rose had never visited the museum before. To Crowley's amazement, she rushed through rooms full of ancient artifacts until suddenly she stopped dead. There he is. It was an image of the same god she claimed to have seen in her vision. Crowley was stunned. What could this mean?
He opened himself up to a power that never ever left him, which he developed. And I believe he was the real thing. I believe that people that came into contact with him came into contact with that which was supernaturally evil. He had given himself under that demonic control, and that demonic control could now affect him and could work through him.
The cloud of mystique that shadowed the band grew with the news of Jimmy Page's interest in Aleister Crowley, an early 20th century Englishman aligned with black magic and demonology. Page's fascination with Crowley led many to believe he was into black magic himself.
I think he was absolutely fascinated with the man and the knowledge of the will. I don't think, I mean, you know, he owned a lot of manuscripts, and he bought the Inverness Castle. That was also Crowley's. And I think with it, he had purchased a lot of manuscripts. And at one point, he had a bookstore in English, an occult bookstore. And he was really more fascinated by the knowledge of it.
It was a sincere fascination, and I think he took a lot out of it. And I think it came through in his music, a lot of that amazing depth and, you know, mystery and all that came out in his music. He was very interested in those types of things, otherworldly things.
Daryl Hall of Hall & Oates, the world's most famous rock and roll duo, is also a follower of the teachings of Satanist Aleister Crowley and a professed homosexual. Daryl Hall admitted, quote, "Around 1974, I graduated into the occult. I also became fascinated with Aleister Crowley, the 19th century British magician who shared these beliefs. I was fascinated by him because his personality was the late 19th century equivalent of mine." Daryl Hall went on to say, quote, "I believe in the ability to change reality through will, and that is the definition of magic. I feel I have done that." He stated, "When I'm singing and in touch with the energy, that's the reason I'm in music." Kurt Cobain of Nirvana revolutionized music in the 1990s. He has been referred to as the Prince of Grunge, the unwitting mouthpiece for a generation, inventing what became the grunge lifestyle. Rolling Stone magazine classified Nirvana's Teen Spirit as the grunge national anthem, and Spin magazine classified Nirvana as the band of the decade. Kurt Cobain made no qualms about whom he was serving when he made it known publicly that his stated goal was to, quote, "get stoned and worship Satan." Kurt Cobain was such a Satanist that Mojo magazine pointed out that Cobain was, quote, "obsessed with Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan and author of the Satanic Bible." Cobain's involvement in Satanism and black magic would escalate to the point where he began to cast spells in an effort to get his will done. Cobain is described as, quote, stumbling on melodies by means he himself didn't fully understand. He received automatic writing from the demonic spirits he had opened himself up to. Cobain struggled with demons that drove and tormented him. Par for the course, the very demonic beings that promised Cobain success would be the very demonic beings that would drive him to his death. Kurt Cobain blew his brains out with a shotgun. His mother lamented, stating, quote, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club."
Crowley apparently influenced people from Adolf Hitler to Timothy Leary to Robert Anton Wilson to Harry Hay to L. Ron Hubbard. And all these names are significant. With regard to Adolf Hitler, it's interesting that two of the societies that influenced Hitler in his early days that became, many people came out of these two societies, the Tool Society and the Verrill Society, to become Hitler's henchmen in the Nazi movement. And basically the Nazi movement used these two societies were societies that were influenced by Aleister Crowley and by Madame Blavatsky. In fact, it's said that Hitler had read, or Crowley claims that Hitler basically sought to put into effect his plan of a new eon and so forth, and the Superman. I mean, before Hitler was talking about the Superman, in the whole Nietzsche idea, Crowley was developing that under occult terms, which is what the whole Nazi thing was. It wasn't simply an atheistic Nietzschean type of idea. It was more of a occultic idea with the Hitler Superman. I mean, when after they went into Germany and Germans had lost the war, I mean, they found, several Buddhists, hundreds and hundreds of Buddhists who had been imported from India. The swastika itself is a Eastern symbol. Crowley's New Age would be a uniting of Eastern mysticism and Western mysticism, and a synthesis of the two, along with occultic drug use for supernatural powers, the philosophy of do what thou wilt, which in the 1960s became do your own thing. In fact, if you think of it this way, Crowley's maxim was do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, totally against Christ, who said, not my will, but thine be done, to the Father, and told us to pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Crowley was called the Beast even from a young age when he was just a teenager by his mom. His mother was a Plymouth Brethren evangelist. His father was a Plymouth Brethren evangelist who he rebelled against. His mom called him the Beast. From that day on, I mean, he signed all of his letters, the Beast 666. I mean, it was pretty clear where he was coming from. But his whole concept was, he read the book of Revelation, and he read about the coming new world order under Antichrist. And he said what attracted him was not the images of the Lamb, not the images that are put forth of the things of the kingdom of God, but he was attracted to the beast and to the dragon and to the whore of Babylon. And he wanted to be, he said, he wanted to get in touch with Satan personally and become his right-hand man. What just so happens that he was used more than anybody in Western culture to influence popular Western culture toward this liberal kind of do what thou wilt attitude, whereby in the 1960s, the maxim was not do what thou wilt, but do your own thing, the same thing, or if it feels good, do it. Now this is significant because in the 1940s, Crowley wrote that he believed his new eon, his movement would take off in the United States like no place else. And Aleister Crowley said what he needed to do was to get a hold of the youth. He used to go to Oxford and other colleges to recruit youth into his movement. He wanted there to be a youth movement that would usher in the new age of Crowley, or Crowleyanity, as some people would call it.
A man described by newspapers as the most wickedest man alive claimed he had penetrated even deeper into mysteries. Born in 1875, Aleister Crowley was raised in a strict religious household. His mother nicknamed him the Beast from the book of Revelation. It was a title he embraced his entire life.
He identified himself as the Antichrist, as the force that would take away this terrible Christian program which had so warped his childhood.
Crowley began studying the occult as a member of the Golden Dawn.
The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was the secret society par excellence of the Victorian age in England. It brought together, again, the knowledge that was available at that point in time. So you had tarot, and you had Kabbalah, and you had John Dee's angelic magic and Rosicrucian traditions all being melded together under a single system.
The Golden Dawn attracted many of the London intelligentsia. Crowley, though, ultimately broke away from the group. He would find his own system of belief after a trip to Egypt, where his wife received a mystical signal that told him to prepare himself for a message from the gods. Heeding the call, he began spontaneously writing a book he called the Book of the Law.
This book announces a new law for mankind. And in fact, it tells us that we are very emboldened and brightened spiritual entity, that in fact, we are as the gods.
The Book of the Law was another synthesis of Eastern and Western spirituality. Crowley called his new system the Lema. It incorporated principles of magic that he said he had learned from ancient Egyptian and other occult sources. He became a self-proclaimed master of action at a distance, focusing the power of his intention or will to create desired effects.
Aleister Crowley defined magic as the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. And his whole approach is basically to empower the practitioner to make their intentions happen, to materialize what they want to have happen in the world.
The Lema's fundamental law was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will." While this may have meant pursuing a higher path for some, for others, it excused every variety of deviant behavior. Some critics claim that Crowley himself was one of its worst offenders.
Crowley was practicing as a spiritual path. He reduced a great deal of symbolic teachings to their essence, which is essentially the duality or the polarity between male and female. And he experimented greatly within that sphere to understand what mysteries were contained within the sexual act.
Crowley went on to start his own secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and wrote numerous books about meditation and ceremonial magic. He also helped reinterpret tarot for the 20th century.
The tarot is a pictorial representation of occult teachings. It's a method of going within and contacting archetypal levels within oneself, spiritual levels, and entering meditative state in which intuition is heightened, and maybe even, where you can see certain patterns developing because you're in the right state of mind.
While popularized by Italian noblemen in the 1300s as playing cards, some say tarot's origins date to ancient Egypt. Over time, they acquired occult significance. Crowley developed a deck of his own, called the Book of Thoth, based on the Egyptian magic he had studied. A popular divination tool today, tarot is said to reveal information about the seeker and the questions about his future.
Everything that's related in one moment of time is all connected. So if two people come together around a question and they're manipulating an oracular tool like this, but if that manipulation is intended to serve the need and the feeling, then it will make a mirroring reflection of the energy that's produced between the two people.
Crowley's writings, like Madame Blavatsky's, were heralded as forerunners of many New Age ideas. But despite his serious work in occultism, ultimately he became infamous for his use of drugs and decadent sexual behavior. After World War II, it was rumored that Hitler had used Crowley's and Madame Blavatsky's writings to help him create his theory of a master race.
I don't think there's any evidence that Hitler read the works of Aleister Crowley per se. It's definitely known that Hitler and members of his regime had a very keen interest in the occult, and they adopted the trappings of occult symbolism.
Ill and addicted to opium, Crowley spent his final days in a boarding house and died in 1947. Like other occultists before him, Crowley attempted to learn the secrets of the gods, only to be discredited and condemned by society.
A theosophist and writer, co-founder of Lucius Trust, formerly known as Lucifer Publishing, wrote in her occult classic known as The Externalization of the Hierarchy regarding the initiation of all humanity into the ancient mystery schools as, quote, "This little-known divine energy now streams out from Shambhala. It embodies in itself the energy which lies behind the world crisis of the moment, It is the will of God to produce certain racial and momentous changes in the consciousness of the race which will completely alter man's attitude to life and his grasp of the spiritual, esoteric, and subjective essentials of living. It is this force which will bring about, in conjunction with the energy of love, that tremendous crisis imminent in the human consciousness, which we call the second crisis, the initiation of the race into the mystery of the ages, into that which has been hid from the beginning." End quote. Bailey, in the same book, Externalization of the Hierarchy, goes on to describe her opinion about Christianity as, quote, "Christianity must also be overthrown because it is based on Jewish sources. The rule of Christ must come to an end because only the rule of force is right. In the world order of the Axis powers, the individual has no rights, has no freedom except insofar as he serves the state. There will be no liberty of thought or conscience. All issues will be decided by the state. And the private citizen will have no right to an opinion. Men will be drafted like slaves into the service of the state." End quote. Bailey goes on to explain the origins of Jesus, in her view, as, quote, "To this everlasting compassion, the cyclic appearance of the sun gods of the ancient myths, the world saviors, and the avatars bear witness and are the guarantee." Dejwa Kul, through Alice Bailey, is not shy about letting the reader know that Christianity is the one big hurdle in the way to create the new age suitable for the appearance of the world teacher. This idea is further confirmed when Bailey states, quote, "There are two major factors which condition the present opportunity. These can be regarded as so completely hindering that unless they are removed, there will be a long delay before Christ can return. They are, number one, the inertia of the average Christian or spiritually minded man in every country, Eastern or Western. Number two, the lack of money for the work of preparation." End quote. Bailey also goes on to say how there must be a chaos before the unification of government and religion, and the subsequent appearance of the quote-unquote Christ, stating, quote, "They come in times of crisis. They frequently create crisis in order to bring to an end the old and the undesirable and make way for new and more suitable forms for the evolving life of God immanent in nature. They come when evil is rampant. For this reason, if for no other, an avatar may be looked for today. The necessary stage is set for the reappearance of the Christ."